We all know that feeling the racing thoughts, the knot in your stomach, maybe just feeling, well, overwhelmed, anxiety. Usually it's framed as this really bad thing, right? Something we just want to get rid of.
Totally. We use words like worried, on edge, stressed out, distracted, all pretty negative.
But what if that's only, I don't know, half the story?
Exactly. What if this feeling we often dread actually holds some kind of hidden potential? Our source material today dives right into that.
This fascinating idea that anxiety, if you understand it right, could actually, well, positive.
Yeah, surprisingly positive. And this isn't just, wishful thinking.
Right. The author is a neuroscientist, and she apparently experienced this herself.
She did, around 40, feeling kind of dissatisfied, overwhelmed, that whole midlife thing, maybe.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
But instead of just pushing through, she put her scientist hat on, started experimenting on herself.
With what? Like lifestyle changes?
Yeah, things like exercise, nutrition, meditation, trying to figure out what was really going on underneath it all.
Yeah. Okay, so it's a personal journey backed by science.
Precisely. And that combination is what fuels this deep dive. Our mission today is really to explore how anxiety, which we usually see as a problem, might actually be a source of positive change. Maybe even a superpower.
A superpower? Okay, I'm intrigued. Where do we start? The source brings up anxiety as a threat detection system. That makes sense, evolutionarily speaking.
Absolutely. Think way back. Pleistocene era. Hunter-gatherer woman, maybe foraging, hears a rustle in the bushes.
Instant alert.
Totally. Her heart starts pounding, adrenaline surges, breathing gets shallow, that whole fight, flight, or freeze thing kicks in.
Survival mechanism, driven by the sympathetic nervous system, right?
Exactly. It's priming her body to react instantly to potential danger.
But fast forward to today, our threats look a bit different. More emails than predators.
And that's the crux of the issue, isn't it? Our brains, well, they haven't fully adapted.
So they struggle to tell the difference between a real lion and, say, a packed inbox.
Kind of, yeah. Or a traffic jam. Or a work deadline. They can trigger a similar stress response.
Yeah.
Robert Sapolsky's research really highlights this mismatch, how modern life keeps us in this state of chronic low-level alert.
Which leads to that feeling of just constant worry, being on edge all the time.
Precisely. It's our ancient alarm system being maybe a little overactive in a world that's complex and stimulating, but not always life-threatening in the same way.
And this can have real consequences, especially if it starts early.
Yeah, Jack Shonkoff's work shows that really intense, prolonged stress in childhood can negatively impact brain development long-term. This difficulty discerning real threats from perceived ones, or just imagined worries. That's often the root of what we call bad anxiety.
A persistent worry, the distraction, even physical discomfort.
All tied to that overactive alarm.
Okay, so if that's the evolutionary basis, what's actually happening inside our heads, like in the brain circuits when anxiety hits?
It's complex, obviously, but we can break down the key players. Think of the amygdala. It's this small almond-shaped bit deep in the brain.
The lookout.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
It's constantly scanning for danger. If it spots something real or even just perceived, it sounds the alarm.
And that signal goes where?
It triggers the hypothalamus, which is like the command center. The hypothalamus then activates the sympathetic nervous system.
Okay, the fight or flight system again?
Right. And that leads to the adrenal glands releasing cortisol, the main stress hormone.
Which gets the body ready for action. More energy, faster heart rate.
Exactly. But the problem with chronic stress, modern stress, is that cortisol can stay elevated. And that constant cortisol bath contributes heavily to that feeling of bad anxiety.
The source mentions bottom-up and top-down processing. Can you unpack that a little?
Sure. Bottom-up is basically your gut reaction. It's signals firing from those lower, more primal brain areas like the amygdala up to your thinking brain, the cortex. It's fast, automatic, emotional.
Like jumping when you hear a loud noise.
Exactly. Top-down is the reverse. It's your prefrontal cortex, the planning, decision-making part, stepping in to regulate those lower regions. It's you consciously saying, okay, calm down. It was just a car backfiring.
Putting the brakes on the automatic reaction.
Precisely. And the HPA axis, that's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, is the whole communication pathway managing that cortisol release.
Got it. So it's clear anxiety isn't just one single thing. The source talks about a spectrum, right? from everyday worries to actual clinical disorders.
That's a really crucial distinction. Think of it like a continuum. On one end, you have diagnosed anxiety disorders are persistent, intense, really interfere with daily life.
And on the other end,
more like everyday anxiety, those fleeting feelings of unease, worry about a presentation, nervousness before a date. Most of us experience that.
And it seems like our brains are kind of wired to focus on the negative stuff more, this negativity bias.
Yeah, it's another evolutionary hangover probably. Our ancestors who paid more attention to threats, the negative stuff, were more likely to survive.
So even if you have a great day, you might find yourself replaying that one critical comment someone made.
Exactly. Your brain just gives negative information more weight. It's a default setting we have to consciously work against sometimes.
Okay, so ancient alarm system, brains wired for negativity. Sounds a bit grim, but this is where the idea of managing it comes in. Emotion regulation.
Yes, exactly. Emotion regulation is key. James Gross, a researcher in this field, defines it as basically influencing which emotions we have, when we have them, and how we actually experience and express them.
It's not just about thinking your way out feelings.
Not entirely. It's more like a constant dialogue, a back and forth between the emotional parts of your brain and the thinking parts. And we regulate automatically sometimes, and sometimes it takes real conscious effort.
The source leaked out a few strategies. The first one is situation selection. Sounds simple enough.
It is. Basically, avoid things you know will make you anxious. If public speaking terrifies you, maybe don't volunteer for the presentation.
But that can be limiting, right, if you avoid everything.
Definitely. It provides short-term relief, but long-term, it can shrink your world.
Okay, what about situation modification?
This is more proactive. It's about changing the situation itself to make it less daunting.
Like if you're anxious about an in-person interview, asking for a phone call instead.
Exactly. You're not avoiding it entirely, but you're tweaking it to feel more manageable. The author sees this as a way to shift anxiety from bad to potentially good. You're taking some control.
Then there's attention deployment, just distraction.
In a way, yeah. It's about consciously shifting your focus. When you feel anxious, you intentionally direct your attention away from the trigger and onto something else, maybe something neutral or positive.
Like a parent pointing out a toy when a kid is scared of a shot at the doctor's office.
Perfect example.
And the last one, cognitive change. This feels like the big one. Changing how you think.
It really is central. Cognitive change or reappraisal is about actively reframing your interpretation of a situation.
So instead of, this job interview is terrifying, I'll bomb, it's more like,
this is a chance to talk about my skills, or this is an opportunity to learn more about the company. That mental shift can dramatically change the emotional response.
It sounds like a huge part of this is just noticing the anxiety, like becoming aware of it without immediately freaking out or trying to squash it.
That's a really profound point. Just acknowledging the feeling, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now, without judging it, creates space.
Space to choose a response.
Exactly. You sit with the discomfort for a moment, realize you can handle it, and then consciously choose a more helpful reaction. Doing that repeatedly actually builds new neural pathways. Makes it easier next time.
The source also mentions that coping mechanisms we learned earlier might not work so well later on.
Oh, absolutely. Things that helped you feel safe as a kid, like needing a parent nearby, aren't always practical or helpful as an adult.
And sometimes we develop coping strategies that are actually harmful, like the examples of Ralph's road rage or Liza using wine to cope.
Right. They might provide temporary relief, maybe numb the anxiety for a bit, but they don't address the root cause. And often, they create their own problems, becoming maladaptive.
A negative cycle.
Precisely.
Okay, so understanding all this, the threat response, the brain stuff, the regulation strategies, it starts to paint a different picture. Anxiety isn't just bad, which brings us to this idea of its superpower.
Yes. The author argues that if we reframe how we see anxiety, it can unlock these surprising benefits. She lists 6.
Let's hear them.
Okay, so strengthening physical and emotional resilience, performing tasks at a higher level, optimizing your mindset, increasing focus and productivity, enhancing social intelligence, and boosting creativity.
Wow, okay. That's quite a list. Let's tackle the first one. Resilience. What does that really mean here?
Resilience essentially isn't about avoiding stress. It's about your ability to bounce back from adversity, maybe even grow from it. Think of it like psychological flexibility.
And anxiety plays a role in building it. That seems counterintuitive.
It does, right? But navigating stressful situations, managing those anxious feelings successfully, that's how you build the muscle of resilience. Walter Cannon's early work on homeostasis, that fight-or-flight response, kind of laid the groundwork for understanding how we adapt to stress.
A lot of resilience research comes from studying really extreme stress, doesn't it? PTSD, trauma.
True. And that research is vital. It shows how severe stress can negatively impact the brain. But resilience isn't just for major trauma. It's also about handling everyday setbacks. A tough project, a disagreement, a disappointment.
The source mentioned those 3 types of stress response again: positive, tolerable, toxic.
Right. Positive stress is that short-lived, mild anxiety that can actually be motivating like nerves before performance. Tolerable stress is more serious, like a major illness or loss. But crucially, if you have support systems, you can cope and recover. It's stressful, but manageable.
And toxic.
That's the prolonged, intense stress without adequate support. That's the kind that really wears down your system and can have long-term negative health effects.
So facing challenges, even failing sometimes, is actually necessary for building resilience, not just coasting through life.
Absolutely. You don't build strength by only lifting light weights. You build it by challenging yourself. The author shares a very moving story about dealing with her brother's sudden death.
Right, how even in intense grief and anxiety, something inside her kicked in.
Her resilience network, she calls it. It pushed her to re-engage, find meaning again. It shows that capacity we have, even when things feel overwhelming.
Okay, superpower 2, enhancing performance. We often think anxiety hurts performance, like choking under pressure.
It definitely can. Bad anxiety often leads to exactly that, choking. But the idea here is that good anxiety, that optimal level of arousal, can actually enhance performance.
Like getting you focused and energized.
Exactly. But first, about that 10,000-hour rule. Our source says it's not the whole picture for expertise.
Right, practice matters, but so do other things. Talent, motivation.
Environment, coaching, lots of factors. And this relates to the concept of flow.
That state of being totally immersed, losing track of time. Csikszentmihalyi's work.
That's the one. Where the challenge perfectly matches your skill level. It's the optimal experience zone. And it's not all or nothing. It exists on a spectrum.
But anxiety can block flow, right? Leading to that choking phenomenon.
Yes. Sim Bylok's research, especially with athletes, shows how high anxiety makes you overthink things you normally do automatically. Your conscious brain interferes with your skilled performance.
The author had an experience like that, introducing someone famous.
Yeah, she talks about totally freezing up introducing a renowned neuroscientist because the pressure in her nerves got the better of her, a classic choke.
So how do you harness anxiety for better performance then? Avoid the choke.
It comes back to managing it. The author worked with a grad student, Tom, who had terrible public speaking anxiety.
What did they do?
They practiced, obviously, but also worked on reframing his mindset, focusing on sharing his passion for the science, not just performing. And preparing for potential questions gave him confidence.
Did he reach flow?
He improved dramatically, became much more comfortable and effective, but maybe didn't fully hit that effortless flow state every time. But it was a huge shift from paralyzing anxiety.
And then there's microflow, smaller moments of engagement.
Exactly. Finding those little pockets of enjoyment and focus in everyday tasks, being intentional, maybe making it a bit fun, that releases dopamine, reinforces the behavior, makes you feel good, and builds motivation. It's accessible.
Okay, superpower 3, optimizing mindset. The source talks about an activist mindset. What's that about?
It's basically taking a proactive stance towards your own thoughts and beliefs, recognizing you're not just stuck with them. You can actively work to shift your perspective.
Like being an activist for your own mental state.
Kind of, yeah. The author gives examples from her own life, changing how she viewed vacations when she was single, from something anxiety-provoking to something freeing, or challenging her fear-based beliefs about money scarcity.
So anxiety can be a signal here, pointing out limiting beliefs.
Exactly. That nagging anxiety might be telling you, hey, this belief isn't serving you, or this plan doesn't actually align with what you truly want. It's information.
Jared's story sounds like a really dramatic example of this. Moving to Costa Rica after hitting rock bottom.
Yeah, that was a huge environmental shift that triggered a massive mindset shift. Finding purpose, changing his surroundings. It broke him out of that cycle of anxiety and depression really quickly. Shows how powerful context can be.
There's also this negative contrast effect mentioned. How does that fit in?
It's the idea that something seems way better when compared to something worse that came just before it.
Like the author giving her talk after a terrible student presentation made her seem amazing by comparison.
Exactly. Or, for Jared, Comparing his well-being in Costa Rica to how miserable he felt before made the positive change feel even more significant. The contrast amplified the good feeling.
And Liza's story, recognizing her wine coping mechanism wasn't working anymore. That seems like a crucial first step for mindset change.
Absolutely. That awareness that this isn't helping is often the catalyst. She then proactively sought changes at work and got coaching to tackle her negative self-talk. That's the activist mindset in action.
Right. Moving on to number 4. Amplifying focus and productivity. Bad anxiety definitely kills focus for me.
For most people. Scatters attention, makes it hard to concentrate. But good anxiety, again, that sweet spot of alertness and engagement, can actually sharpen focus.
But what about those what-if thoughts? They seem like the enemy of focus.
They can be, especially if your mind just spins on them when you're not actually trying to solve a problem, like worrying when you have low cognitive load. But the source suggests you can learn to channel them.
How?
By treating the what-if list productively, using it for planning, anticipating problems, strategizing, turning worry into preparation.
Kylie's story about multitasking and phone use really hits home. It makes anxiety worse, doesn't it?
Hugely, especially in adolescence, but really for anyone. Constantly switching tasks fragments your attention, strains your working memory, and definitely ups the anxiety ante. Singular focus is much more effective.
And exercise comes up again here for boosting attention.
Yes, big time. Studies show physical activity improves performance on attention tasks, like the Stroop test. It boosts mood, energy, fights anxiety and depression symptoms, and might even increase white matter in the brain.
Better brain connections.
Seems like it. The author mentions testing an Olympic athlete who had incredible prefrontal function, tying elite physical conditioning to strong executive control.
And Dev's startup anxiety, that's a great example of turning what-ifs into a tool.
Exactly. His mentor, Monica, helped him reframe his worries not as just anxiety, but as essential risk assessment for his business. Channeling that hyper-focus productively. Another win for the activist mindset.
Okay, 5th superpower. Priming the social brain. Social intelligence, managing social anxiety, compassion. Social stuff is a huge anxiety trigger for lots of people.
It really is. Social intelligence, or SQ, as Daniel Goleman calls it, is crucial for navigating those situations. It's about understanding social cues, communicating effectively, both verbally and non-verbally.
And having good social connections actually helps buffer stress.
Definitely. A rich social life, strong relationships, empathy, they all contribute to stress tolerance and lower anxiety.
So good anxiety might nudge us towards connection, while bad social anxiety makes us pull away.
That's the idea. Bad social anxiety leads to withdrawal, avoidance. Good anxiety might motivate you to prepare for a social event, think about conversation topics, make an effort.
The source mentions specific brain areas involved in understanding others, mentalizing.
Yeah, areas like the medial prefrontal cortex and the temporoparietal junction, they help us figure out what others might be thinking or feeling. And mirror neurons play a role in empathy, too, feeling with someone.
So empathy isn't just one thing. It involves mirroring and consciously thinking about the other person's perspective.
Exactly. It's a mix of bottom up, those mirror neurons firing, and top down, actively trying to understand processes, plus self-awareness and regulating your own emotional response. Social intelligence is this blend of attention, perception, and emotion regulation, all tied into how we handle stress and anxiety in social contexts.
Lavon's story, using basketball to manage anxiety but also becoming a great team leader, that's interesting.
Yeah, he developed strong social skills and empathy almost naturally through sport. But crucially, recognizing his academic anxiety led him to seek help there too, building confidence across different areas.
And Adam, the shy introvert finding connection through shared interests like anime.
That's a great example of how finding common ground and sharing passions can activate social intelligence. Recognizing shared struggles, feeling empathy from others as well as for them, that really helped alleviate his social anxiety.
Okay, last superpower. Boosting creativity. We usually think of creativity as this special talent for artists.
But the Force defines it much more broadly. It's a fundamental human ability problem solving, invention, insight, innovation. It's not just about painting or writing poetry.
So adopting a creative approach means being more flexible, open, willing to learn.
Exactly. And interestingly, being able to tolerate negative states, including anxiety, seems to be important for the creative process.
How so?
Well, creativity is often defined as producing something both novel and appropriate or useful. It involves complex brain networks, abstract thinking, self-reflection, cognitive flexibility, working memory, attention. not just right brain, left brain.
And anxiety can fuel this.
It seems you can. Anxiety can draw your attention to things that evoke strong emotions, and those very things can become the raw material, the inspiration for creative work. There's a link between emotional processing and creative cognition.
The source also mentioned creative people might be less filtered, letting more information in.
Yeah, potentially having reduced latent inhibition, meaning they filter out seemingly irrelevant stimuli less. This might allow for more unusual connections and broader thinking.
Like the author's PhD story, the anxiety about her slow analysis method pushed her to find a creative shortcut using Excel.
Perfect example. The bad anxiety fueled divergent thinking. She was stressed, needed a better way, and her brain came up with a novel, more efficient solution. That's cognitive flexibility spurred by discomfort.
And this idea of a tragic gap, anxiety pointing to a desire to create.
Yeah, that sense of unease or dissatisfaction that bad anxiety can bring might actually be highlighting an unmet need, an innate human drive to make things, solve problems, express ourselves.
So creativity involves harnessing both the good and bad anxiety, the focus and the discomfort.
Exactly. It's navigating that tension control and letting go effort and ease.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to take in about how anxiety could be beneficial, but how do we actually do it? What are the practical tools?
Right. The theory is great, but we need actionables. The source offers a bunch of hacks or strategies. First step, self-awareness.
Tuning into your own patterns, like when do I get anxious? What does it feel like?
Exactly. Maybe even using the survey questions provided in the source material periodically to get a baseline. Then, simple things like actively diverting your attention during an anxious moment. Focus on something positive, something concrete around you.
And celebrating the wins, noticing when you do manage it.
Definitely. Acknowledge every success, however small. It builds momentum. Also, being proactive about your environment, choosing wisely who you spend time with, modifying situations you know are triggers.
Like preparing for that presentation to feel more in control.
Precisely. And the basics are huge here. Sleep. Prioritize it. The author mentions cutting back on alcohol and aiming for 8 hours in bed. Find what works for you.
And exercise, again, finding the type that boosts your mood.
Yes, it's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
Maybe it's running, maybe yoga, maybe dancing. Find your joy. And getting out in nature, even a short walk in a park, can help restore equilibrium.
Reaching out seems important too, not isolating yourself.
Crucial. Connecting with supportive people makes a massive difference. And interestingly, practicing altruism, doing small, kind things for others.
How does that help anxiety?
Boosts dopamine, makes you feel good, connected, builds resilience. Simple but effective. Also consciously cultivating those micro-flow moments.
Maybe keeping a journal of things you enjoy, things that make you feel engaged.
Great idea. Then you can intentionally schedule more of them and working on that activist mindset, maybe using a check-in exercise to focus on positive self-perceptions and build on them.
What about that negative self-talk?
Actively challenge it, reframe it. Focus on strengths, on productive aspects, not just weaknesses. Practice cognitive flexibility, see mistakes as learning opportunities, not catastrophes.
And the what-if list, again, visualize or talk through the worries to challenge them.
Exactly. And sometimes just changing your environment can shift your mental state. Go for a walk, work in a different room. Adding exercise to that change is even better for attention.
The source mentions sticky meditation too, like tea meditation.
Yeah, finding ways to make mindfulness practices more enjoyable and easier to stick with, linking them to existing rituals, and consciously priming your social brain. Make that call, send that text, reach out.
Even fake smiling helps.
Apparently. Research suggests even forcing a smile can lower your stress response physiologically. And finally, intentionally cultivating compassion, focusing on feelings of warmth and care for yourself and others.
It's a really comprehensive toolkit, lots to experiment with.
It really is. The goal isn't to eliminate anxiety entirely, but to develop a different relationship with it.
So the big takeaway really is anxiety doesn't have to be the enemy.
Not at all. It can be a signal, a source of energy, a motivator for growth, if we learn how to listen to it and work with it, not just against it.
Moving from feeling controlled by it to feeling like you have some agency over it, unlocking that potential.
Exactly. It's about empowerment.
So, a final thought for you listening. Think about those uncomfortable feelings, those anxious moments you experience. Instead of just wishing them away, could they actually be trying to tell you something, guiding you somewhere important?
Maybe it's worth approaching your own anxiety with a bit more curiosity. See what happens.